You're listening to Keeping It 100 with Mel and Bruce, featuring Larry Carroll, sponsored by the 100 Black Men of Las Vegas. What they see is what they'll be. I'm Mel Tillar, your host. I'm thrilled to be with you today. Ladies and gentlemen, we have as a very special guest, Amy Ferreira, and she is a candidate for Justice Court Department 8 in Las Vegas. Amy, welcome to the show.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
We're thrilled to have you. So you want to be the judge in the Justice Court Department 8. Why should folks in Las Vegas vote for you?
Yeah, so I really do want to be the next Justice of the Peace for Department 8. There's a lot of reasons why I think people should vote for me. And I'm going to take you just a quick step back because this will help you understand a little better. When I was 4 years old, I told everybody that I wanted to be a judge when I grew up. I told everybody in preschool who thought I was a total weirdo because they wanted to be Disney princesses and race car drivers and superheroes. And I was the little nerdy kid who was like, I'm going to be a judge. And so I'm just so close to achieving that goal. And I'm super excited about it. My grandma used to babysit me when I was a little child, and she would make me watch the People's Court with her. And at that time, it was Judge Wapner. And so every day, religiously, we would sit down together, we would watch People's Court, but we would talk about the cases. So we would talk about who should win, why they should win, how we thought the judge was going to rule, why we thought the judge was going to rule that way. And we literally did this day after day after day. And so as a child, I have been working towards this from young adulthood into law school, into my career after law school. And so this has always been my end game. And I tell you that story because I think it's important to have somebody sitting in that seat who's passionate and to understand why they're so passionate. So this isn't something, that I take lightly. It's not something that just one day I decided, hey, this sounds like a good idea. This has always been my goal. Furthermore, I think that I have the right legal knowledge. I think I have an excellent judicial temperament. And I think above all else, I have an unwavering dedication to justice. And I've had that since I was a little child. And I'm really looking forward to serving the community.
How are you going to make Department 8 better?
Well, I think that oftentimes when it comes to judges, there's this kind of like interesting mystique surrounding them. And we take the human element out of the court system. And so I think oftentimes when people come into court, right, they're nervous, they're scared. As the courtroom is set up, you have this person who's wearing this weird black dress, essentially, who's seated at a chair that's higher than everybody else. And you start to feel like, wow, this person's really different than I am because I've never sat in a chair that high, And I think that when you have somebody who comes to the bench who considers themselves just a regular member of the community, who has experiences like many of the people that end up before them, I think it makes people feel a little bit more seen and a little bit more heard than maybe they would if they just walked in and saw this person who they feel like they can't relate to. And so I hope that I have that certain kind of disposition that makes people feel comfortable talking to me, and that makes everybody always feel like they have a chance, that even if my ruling goes against them, they feel like they've been seen and that they've been heard.
Okay, all right. Give me a yes or no to this question. The justice system is biased against Black and brown people.
Yes.
Okay, all right. So when a Black or brown person walks in front of you, you're knowing that, how does that impact how you deal with that person, how you talk to that person? What is your thought process?
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to meet people where they are, whether that's based on their race, whether it's based on their gender, whether it's based on their ethnicity, whether you can tell that, for example, maybe the words that you're using, they're not understanding. I mean, I feel like you sort of have to be a chameleon. You have to be able to adapt to make sure that the people standing in front of you understand what's happening. I mean, if you have a litigant and they walk out of court having no idea what has just happened, you as a judge have failed in your job. So I think certainly meeting people where they're at. I also think that it's important for judges, I don't care how long you've been on the bench, to take various training courses that kind of help you understand some things that you do that are having unintended consequences. And I'll give you the perfect example. I took a training class not too long ago. and it was related to different gender biases.
Yes.
And in the course, I realized that some of the terms that I use when I'm addressing litigants, I'm using those terms for a sign of respect. But to those litigants, they might disagree with those terms that I'm assigning them, and they might not take it as a sign of respect. They might feel bothered by that. And that's something that I hadn't thought about. So I think continuing to understand how our words affect other people, how our mindset, how our procedures affect other people is absolutely necessary. I think that there are inherent injustices in the justice system, and people who ignore them or deny them or say they don't exist are really doing a disservice to everybody in the community.
As a judge, as a judge, do you feel any responsibility for how the public in general views the justice system? So, and I understand that you don't have any kind of power over the Supreme Court, but when that's the court that everybody thinks about now, okay? And many people are just losing all kind of confidence, just losing all kind of trust in the court system as a whole because of a lot of the decisions that the Supreme Court is making now. How do you approach that?
So it's interesting that you bring up that point, because I have always thought that our courts should work for the people that they serve and not against them. And you're right. Every time I talk to members of the community, oftentimes they're expressing this kind of negative opinion of the justice system. And here's why I think justice court is absolutely the right place for me. As you know, there's district court, there's justice court, there's municipal court, there's the court of appeals, there's all these different courts. The beauty of justice court is it is the first step in a multi-step process for people entering the judicial system. And I think
let's do this. Let's not assume that all of my listeners know exactly what the Justice Court does. How about explaining exactly what the Justice Court does?
Absolutely. So Justice Court handles criminal cases. Every criminal case that comes through starts in Justice Court. Justice Court also handles civil matters if they're under a certain dollar amount. Justice Court handles small claims, it handles traffic tickets, it handles evictions, it handles a multitude of cases. When it comes to criminal matters, as I mentioned, every case starts in Justice Court. And sometimes I feel like when you catch people at the beginning, if somebody's first experience is with me in Justice Court, whether they're a defendant, a police officer, a witness, a victim, whoever they are, if that first experience for them is positive, that might dictate what happens for them moving forward in their case. If they walk in and they have a terrible experience, well, of course, now they've formed their opinion. If they walk in and, the judge has left them sitting around in the courthouse for 3 hours without giving them any sort of update as to what's going on, do you think that person's ever going to want to come back to court again voluntarily? Absolutely not. And so I think with Justice Court, you can form a lot of opinions or change a lot of opinions because you're step one. And so for that, I'm excited.
So your philosophy, are you more concerned about, okay, I'm following the law, it's written down, it's ABC, this is what the law says, or are you kind of also concerned about the individual that's standing in front of you, and are you looking at that, okay, as to, okay, is it possible that I can have a positive impact on this person, or does it not matter because the law is what the law is?
Yeah, so as a judicial officer, you always have to follow the law regardless. Yeah. But following the law does not mean that you ignore everything that's around you, and you certainly don't ignore the person who's standing in front of you. So I think that, yes, the law is the law, and somebody might have to have a consequence if they commit a certain crime. But what that consequence is and how you deal with that person, I think can make or break what happens for that person moving forward. And I also think that a lot of people don't quite grasp how you helping somebody in our community helps our entire community. If somebody has done something wrong and you give them an opportunity to better themselves, they will likely not commit that crime ever again. And that doesn't only help the person, that helps everybody in our community. So I think sometimes, there's this big discussion about alternative sentencing and people getting slaps on the wrist and all those things. But some people only need a slap on the wrist. Not everybody. Some people need to go to prison, and that's just a fact. But if we can do something to help somebody and make our community better, that's a win-win. And I think that that's always our responsibility.
Talk to our audience about your current position.
Yeah, so I am currently a hearing master with Las Vegas Justice Court. I was appointed to the bench in 2020. And in 2022, I was honored to receive the Las Vegas Justice Court Employee of the Year. What does a hearing master do is the question that most people have. It has a very fancy title. I told somebody I was a hearing master at an event the other day, and he thought that I did something with audiology for people who had hearing problems. And so it's just funny for people who are not in the legal system. That's a very strange kind of term to hear. A hearing master does many of the duties that a justice of the peace does. And so what happens is the justices decide usually which portions of their duties they do not wish to do themselves. And then they say, here you go, hearing master, you do that for me. So I'm sure you're familiar with the expression, it rolls downhill.
Oh, yes.
Yes. So I have gotten to do a number of duties in the 4 years that I have been here. And it's really been such a blessing and such an excellent sort of stepping stone to my end game, which, as I mentioned, has always been justice of the peace.
So talk to me about a case that you have adjudicated that has really stood out to you, really had an impact on you, and explain why.
So there are a lot of cases that have had that sort of effect on me. I'll give you just one example. I have had the very difficult assignment of doing some of our summary eviction matters. And those matters are extremely difficult because when it comes to non-payment of rent, there are not a lot of defenses to that particular type of eviction matter. Whereas in some eviction matters, there are a lot of different defenses. That one, there's like 3. And so I had a woman who came before me and she had not paid her rent. And she explained to me during the course of the proceeding that the reason that she could not pay her rent is because she had been diagnosed with cancer and she was going through treatments, and she had to quit her job to basically take care of her health.
Yes.
And she had, I want to say, a 5-year-old daughter. And I mean, talk about break your heart, right? I mean, I think it's a lot easier for somebody who isn't quite so sensitive to sit in that seat and make those tough decisions. Like, listen, I make the decisions, but it's not easy. And so I did what I had to do, which is I evicted her, but then I also exercised the only kind of judicial discretion I have in that scenario to stay my order for the maximum amount of time that I could under the law, because that's all I could do. And so I gave her that time in the hopes that 1, she could get some rental assistance during that time and stay in her place, or 2, make some arrangements to be able to get herself and her young child to a secondary location, or 3, to try to scrape together some money that would be enough for the landlord to say, okay, we're going to hold off on this eviction. But it's a really tough area. And we have some laws in place that are, I don't know what the right word I should use is, interesting when it comes to summary eviction procedures. And so that case, among many other cases, really has had an impact, probably more so on my heart than anything else. But yeah, so that's just one example. I could give you probably 1,000 different examples, but that one sticks out to me for sure.
Okay, all right. So across the country, when we look at the judicial system, data says that females kind of fare not quite so well sometimes. Black and brown people kind of fare not so well sometimes, or not as well as others. Okay, how is District 8 presently doing as far as treating everybody fairly and equally? How are you guys doing?
Do you mean Justice Court Department 8?
Yes.
That's a question I don't know that I can answer because I don't sit in that department. So how Justice Court 8 is going about doing things or not doing things, I couldn't tell you. I can certainly tell you that the judge who's currently there has been there for a very long time. I think I want to say, and I hope I'm not mistaken on this, I think she's the only judge to ever have been in Department 8. It was a new department, I think, when she took the bench. And so, I mean, certainly some big shoes to fill, but I think I'm ready to fill those shoes.
All right, I like that. Listen, this has been a very interesting conversation. You've given us a lot of great information. I'd like to leave you with the last word.
Awesome. Thank you so much for having me, number one. Number two, I'm very, very excited at the possibility of being the next Justice of the Peace in Department 8. I feel like it's my next step in my service to the community. I have been serving since 2006. I was a prosecutor in the District Attorney's Office for 13 years. And in that capacity, I represented victims who are some of the most vulnerable members of our community. So I handled child sexual assault cases for victims under the age of 10. So I had the very littles. I started the first ever animal cruelty unit at the District Attorney's Office. And I finished my career as the team chief of the domestic violence unit. I think that some of that speaks to sort of where my head and my heart lie. I will also tell you my biggest accomplishment. I am a mom. I have a 4-year-old daughter.
Okay,
I'm married.
congratulations.
Thank you. And I'll tell you my thing that I love to talk about as much as my daughter is my husband and I have a very small, humble farm filled with rescue animals. So every creature finds its way to our house. I made my husband buy a barn, a house that barn in the backyard. And so we have managed to fill up that barn, but it's a revolving door of animals in and out, and we wouldn't have it any other way. I am so grateful to have been chatting with you today, and I look forward to serving the community.
One last question. Are you involved in any other community organizations?
Yes, I am involved with the Red Rock Democratic Club. I'm involved with the Women's Democratic Club. I am involved in a number of animal groups here in town. And so I try to do my part in terms of different services and community service that those different groups put on. I'm also a member of the Clark County Bar Association, the Southern Nevada Women's Association of Attorneys I'm also part of. And so in that capacity, I get to sort of reach out to the community in various ways that those different groups host. And so, yeah, it's really been quite a blessing.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Amy.
Thank you.
You've been listening to Keeping It 100 with Mel and Bruce, featuring Larry Carroll, sponsored by the 100 Black Men of Las Vegas. What they see is what they'll be. I'm Mel Tillar, your host, and until next time, keep it 100.